the Sonja Shockley Show. Turn your bitter into better. Into better. It's the Sonja Shockley Show. It's the Sonja Shockley Show. Turn your bitter into better.
Hello, and welcome to everybody. Welcome to the Sonja Shockley Show. I am your host, inspirational singer and speaker, life coach, soul nurturer, and your big sister in relationships. And I help people turn their pain into purpose, their wounds into wisdom, and their bitter into better. That sounds good, huh? I'm so excited today because today I'm hanging out with neuro coaches. Are you hearing me today? I'm hanging out with the best of the best, the cream of the crop. These ladies really know their stuff, and they have been teaching me so much about the brain. But, there's so much that we can talk about when it comes to the mind and the brain. But I specifically wanted to talk about trauma and the impact that trauma has on the brain. So I'm going to ask each one of my guests to just introduce themselves, give us a brief introduction of who you are and what you do. Starting out with Kelly.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kelly Bennett, and I am a international neuro coach, and I specialize with people who have physical pain and trauma. Often we see these two combined together, and if we can help you with the physical pain, then we can work on the trauma and help you relieve a lot of that struggle that comes in your life from the physical pain and the actual trauma that occurred.
And Fanny.
Hello, everybody. I'm an occupational therapist and a mindfulness neuro coach, and I also I am a certified Qigong instructor, and I do like to teach mindfulness and to all the people that I can reach, because it makes a big impact in managing emotions and decreasing or keeping stress away. And I'm glad that you invited me to the show.
Welcome. And all right, Mary.
Hi, Sonja, Kelly.
Hello.
I'm a trauma-centered neuro coach. I teach, I work with individuals, but I like to teach workshops. I'm certified in neuro leadership trainings, and so I develop programs to present to businesses and individuals and families who are experiencing the effects of trauma, particularly. And even churches. I've given a workshop at a church just before COVID happened. And since then, my workshops have been altered. And so I'm trying to bring those things online.
All right. Powerful stuff, ladies. And I'm just going to invite you to take a deep breath and let's just have a good time. We'll pretend like we're at a coffee shop in Paris and just talking about trauma and the effects that it has on the brain. So let's just start it out with, what is trauma? What is trauma? It seems like a simple question, but I'm sure each one of you will have a different answer. So I'll start out with Kelly. What is trauma?
Trauma is a memory that occurs kind of on a loop. It's a perseverating memory. So you just keep thinking about that memory, and different things can trigger that memory. It could be a smell, it could be a taste, it could be you are driving by an area where maybe something had happened to you, and that triggers the memory. So there lots of different things that can kind of trigger it. And it just is a perseverating loop of a thought that you cannot release from your brain.
Excellent. Fanny, what would you like to say when you think of trauma? What is it?
Well, trauma happens when a child or a teenager or an adult is exposed to a severe threatening situation that can impact their system, and they can be in shock, and then it lingers, and it can affect people through adulthood, throughout all their lives.
Yes, excellent, excellent. And Mary?
Short answer is that trauma is anything that overwhelms the senses at any age, and how we mitigate that, how that memory is consolidated in our memory rather, and how quickly we bounce back from it is a much more complex answer.
Mm. And so, what I'm hearing, ladies, just the takeaways from each one of you, it's a shock to the system. And it sounds like it makes an imprint in our senses. And it can be triggered by any of our senses, whether it's a sight, a sound, a smell. It could bring us back to that trauma, and we replay it, like Kelly was saying, like a loop, like an instant replay that we would see in the sports when they say, "Let's look at that game again. Let's look at that play again." You could replay it in your mind over and over it. And for someone where if it's a difficult, just a horrible trauma, this can be very detrimental. So let's talk about COVID for a minute. Could we say that people have had some sort of trauma when it comes to COVID? Do you think that COVID has made this shocking impact on the system? What do you think when I say that question? Mary, I'm gonna start out with you.
Oh, trauma is a very individual thing. COVID has not affected me in a traumatic way, but it certainly has affected many others in severely traumatic ways and not so severely. Again, it just depends on how adept we are, how well resourced we are, and how able we are to mitigate stress in general. And that's the complex answer that we can go into. Sonja?
All righty. And what are your thoughts on that, Fanny, as far as COVID being a traumatic experience for some?
Most definitely, it has had an impact in many people for different reasons, from not being able to connect with other people because they've been isolated, kids having school at home. They had so many issues, and I work with some kids, special needs kids, and virtually it has been very difficult for everybody, for the parents, the kids, maneuvering the new platforms, for the therapist as well. Try to keep grounded and centered, and not be frustrated. And for in any all the other people in the world, people that lost families, it has been very hard. Yes, the impact has been tremendous, and it impacts the mental health. If you
Yeah.
don't have, as Mary said, the resources, the internal resources to be resilient, to calm down and try to center yourself when you encounter difficulties, creating a space where you can relax and be calm, so you can face what comes your way.
Yes.
For sure, that's for sure. And how about you, Kelly, when you think about COVID and the impact it's had on our whole world, not just the nation, but the whole world?
So the impact has been pretty severe. When we look at the school systems in my area and the individual high schools coming out with the numbers of D's and F's that students have had this past year versus previous years, it's up to 60 and 80% of students are experiencing D's and F's. Now we know that that is from the stress that they've occurred during this time at home and not being able to engage in social activities and whatnot. And little children think that it's normal that you have to wear a mask, and they're sometimes fearful and scared of people that don't have it on. Yet when we look at the elderly, and you're working with them, they're extremely fearful of everyone coming in wearing a mask. So there are many stresses there. There's an increase in domestic violence. There's been an increase in people with divorces. So there's been a lot of trauma throughout the world that has happened. And it's not unique to the United States. It's all of us as a humanity share this experience. And
yes.
Going into lockdown and coming out and going back in, it can be incredibly stressful. And depending on what country you're in, for instance, Australia and Canada, they've been more strict than the US. They're still experiencing the lockdowns that happen, and then they get to do nothing. And then maybe they get to do something. So it's COVID's had a pretty significant impact on us.
For sure, for sure. I mean, COVID came through and said, remember my name. And I don't think anybody will forget COVID-19, even though it took over the whole 2020. And I always say, I feel like God purposely, intentionally chose the year 2020 to bring all of this devastation. But it's been enlightening. It's been an enlightenment for myself because I had to look at life through a new lens. And so when you think about 2020 vision, gaining a new perspective, being more insightful, and you had to either be adaptable in 2020 and roll with the changes, or you weren't going to survive. So thank you, ladies. Thank you so much. So you were talking about the children and how they were impacted. And a young child now, wearing masks is the norm for them. Homeschooling became the norm for them. Let's talk about trauma when it comes to children. Let me give you a scenario of a family that has 3 young children, all under the age of 10. And so we've got a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 9-year-old, and they have watched their mother, continuously be beaten by the father. She's been through domestic violence. This, of course, has been traumatic. How is it that each one of these children will walk away from the situation traumatized in a different way? Tell me a little bit, how is the brain working that each child will have a different memory or a different trigger when it comes to that trauma? And we'll start out with Kelly for that question.
My theory would be that the youngest, if they're out of that situation and the mother's out of the situation, is going to have the best response for being able to heal if put into the right kinds of play therapy. The older child and the 5-year-old will have the most significant difficulty, probably the oldest having the greatest difficulty, because the oldest one has probably helped the mother in many, many ways and tried to be there for the mother, and may have been a target of some of that physical and emotional abuse as well. All of them certainly are going to be significantly impacted. and they are going to have lifelong triggers that will happen. Therapists such as the three of us and yourself, Sonja, can help mitigate some of that with the kinds of therapies we do. So
Yeah,
definitely
for sure.
having them engaged in a therapy, but they're going to have flashbacks and memories and
Yes, yes. Thank you, thank you. Fanny, what do you think about something like that? Each child, they're walking away with different triggers, different traumas. What's
Yes,
your take on that?
because each depending on where they are developmentally, if a child is 2 years old or under, it's going to be affected differently because the parent they are they need a parent to soothe them and to be able to console them. And if the parent, for example, is abusive, or the mother has issues and is depressed and is not going to be providing a supportive environment, the child cannot form attachments, and it will affect the child, the growth, the development of the brain. And when the child is on the other range of age, it's different, but still it will affect uh, how they form relationships in the future, how they function as an adult. And it's really a broad range of things that can happen. Yes.
Excellent, excellent, for sure, Fanny. I like that you got into the relationships. And Mary, what's your take on that question?
Well, the flip side of what Kelly said, I think the younger the child is, the less resourced she is, because they've had less life experiences and they're more dependent on that parent. Not to contradict the fact that what Kelly said, they're probably going to be more receptive to therapy in the future, but more severely affected in the immediacy of that situation, because they're most dependent on that parent. So if you're a little baby or a 2-year-old or even a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, and you're looking at your mother and there's chaos in the home and she's being treated violently, that is a threat to your existence. And as a 7-year-old, you might have some other tools in your pocket that you can pull out. You might have a tree fort you can run and hide. Uh, you might have an older sibling or an aunt or an uncle that you can run to or could confide in. Yeah, that older child's going to be um, experiencing a lot more triggers, I would think, in the future. Whereas the baby or the younger the child, the more suppressed that memory might be. Also, with a younger child, it can be mitigated with immediacy. Let's say that the dad or the father or whoever the abuser is, could be a mother, leaves the situation, and the other parent just comes and scoops that child up and just holds it and turns on some music and does some soothing. Maybe it's singing, who knows what that parent's resources might be to soothe that child. If that can be done with immediacy in the first hour or so, it really, really does. Studies show that it has a very positive effect on that child's ability to mitigate and for that memory to consolidate in a more beneficial way.
so also Sonja, with young children, you have to fall hopelessly in love with someone. It doesn't necessarily have to be a parent, but if that family, each of those kids had somebody to fall hopelessly in love with by the time that they were 2 years old, they're going to be more resilient. Now, if they don't, what Mary is saying is going to happen. And that child is going to be having difficulty forming attachments later in life, throughout their whole life.
Hmm.
So that first 2 years is so vitally important for children. So I
Yeah,
feel like
critical.
we don't know enough about the family. And I'd
Right,
like
right.
to know more. Um,
Yeah,
yes,
and
but
I'm just giving
I
you a
love
scenario. I was giving you a scenario, and I guess what I was thinking about is just how, you can sit at the same kitchen table with the same parents, but
Mhm.
everyone is affected in a different way. And I think that just goes back to the trauma, the uniqueness of trauma, and how somebody's pain might be at a 10 for them, but for you, it might just be a 5. And so just depending on how that trauma impacted you. Well, ladies, you've been wonderful, and our time is getting away so fast. I tell you, I have so many questions I wanted to ask, but it sounds like we're coming to the end soon. I wanted to just quickly talk about what does it look like physically on the brain when it comes to trauma? How is it impacting the synapses or the brain? And don't get too technical, because we're not rocket scientists here. We just regular folks. If you can talk in layman's terms, but how does it impact the brain physically when we talk about trauma? And wanted to start out with Mary for that question, since you are the expert. No, all of you are
No,
experts.
no. Kelly is a social worker, so she's one kind of expert that
No,
I don't
I'm
have.
teasing. Everybody's an expert. Go ahead.
Thank you for the compliment. So neurocircuitry, neural patterns. The more we think about something, it's those memories that fire together, they wire together, and so the brain circuitry for fear and things like that is affected. Also, those networks in the brain that are fear-based can be more active. Over the long term, the more we are focused on stress and negativity or fear, uh, we can lose gray matter over time, and that does absolutely affect our ability to even um, the way we see the world around us.
Okay, excellent. And Fanny, can you hear me, Fanny?
Oh, yes, yes. That's yes, trauma affects certain areas of the brain that process the fear response, the emotions, but the fear response mainly, and it's called the amygdala, and these are structures that you can see after a trauma. They can see in MRIs, and it grows, it's bigger, more salient, and then it's connected to other areas where the memories are formed. So when this trauma happens, it triggers all sorts of connections, changes in the brain. So the people that have been affected by trauma, they learn certain things. So when there's something in the environment that is even close to that situation that they experience, it immediately triggers this loop, uh, or not necessarily a loop, continuous loop, like Kelly said, but it will put somebody on flight or fight response, and it will trigger stress. There's too many uh, ways that people respond. Yeah.
Mhm.
For sure. Good. Thank you, Kelly.
If you can imagine just a beautiful, healthy brain, and we've seen those before on TV and whatnot. When you've got trauma and immense stress, that brain shrinks, like Mary was saying.
Mhm.
Now, it's not a forever thing. You can go back and make that brain nice and plump and healthy again. And you do that by doing a lot of mindfulness techniques, And you don't have to do a lot, just a little bit every day. And you're going to make that brain from being smaller to just being able to grow and be nice and healthy again. And what you're doing is exactly what Mary said, just reconnecting some neural pathways and stopping the neural pathways that were more negative, that were causing so much stress, that makes the brain just a little bit smaller. And then as Fanny was saying, those individual pieces of our brain, those organs like you would have in your body, in our brain, some do get bigger and some get smaller. So they're just immense changes on our brain that happen. It's not permanent.
I love it. I love it. And you know, it's such good news to know that the body wants to repair itself. It wants to restore. And just hearing, and you know, we're all in class together right now, and we're doing just these simple exercises, and they seem so simple, but have been so helpful to me. You know, just the deep breathing, the wiggling of my toes, or the touching of my hands together to hijack and get me out of that stressful situation and bring me back to the present moment. And we all know the beauty of just being in the moment and not being anxious because we're in the future or depressed because we're in the past, but really just enjoying the moment that we are in right now.
And one of the fastest way to get out of your brain and the tension when you are stressed, if you can practice these little things, it's so powerful. And you have to try to pay attention to your body sensations, and you can train yourself, and it's very easy once you train yourself enough. And as soon as you start focusing on a sensation in the body, the breathing, for example, or the air that comes in when you breathe, that immediately, if you're able to do that immediately, it's like a switch. And then it stops the stress. It goes from the negative flight or fight response to a response where you are calm and you can create a space. But of course, it needs to be developed. But it's really not that complex. You can do it with training.
Yes, yes. And I'm glad that you mentioned training, because all of our guests today are neuro coaches, they're experts. And so, to all of our listeners, if you want to reach out to them, you can do so. Kelly, of course, has been a regular on the Sonja Shockley Show. It's always a pleasure. And you can reach Kelly at neurofitness.us. Again, that's Kelly at neurofitness.us. And Fanny, you did awesome today. So happy to have you. Fanny, you can reach her on her website, coaching.com. So that's www.fannyeliza or elizaga coaching.com. And last but not least, if you'd like to reach out to Mary, you can reach her at Mary. And how do you say your last name again?
Nauha.
All right, Nauha. And that's MaryNauha at gmail.com. I want to thank you guys again. You've been awesome. Thank you so much for doing this for me. I'm always grateful to use this platform to get the information out there to so many who need it. And you guys know that you can follow me on social media at Sonja M. Shockley. That's on Facebook and Instagram and YouTube. Please take time to go to my YouTube channel and like and subscribe and share these videos with people, because so many people need these inspirational messages. And you can reach me by email at soniathegriefcoach@gmail.com. Before we go, ladies, any final thoughts? Can you, each one of you, give me at least one way that a person can help to heal themselves, or whatever your final takeaway you like to share? But give us at least one final takeaway. And I'll start out with you, Kelly.
The biggest thing you can do is give yourself grace. So give yourself the grace and space to feel what you feel and implement some of the mindfulness techniques. You can find them all over on YouTube. Just a deep breathing, mindful yawning, all of it does such significant impact.
Yes, for sure, for sure. We're going to have you guys back just to do breathing and yawning. And Fanny, what's your last takeaway you want to let our listeners know?
It's very important to embrace routines. Every day, a little routine for self-care, to give yourself a space and reflect, breathe, take care of yourself. It's one of the most important things. People do not do that. So that's why the stress keeps piling up. And you can do it once a day, you can do it several times a day. And it's very powerful.
Yes, yes, it is. And folks get like a teapot, after a while the teapot just starts screaming because it's just boiling over like no more.
No more.
And so, yes, these mindfulness techniques help with that. And Mary, any last thoughts for us?
Yes, three things came to mind. The first thing, I think it's important to know that you're not broken. The brain has ability to repair and rebuild, and I think one of the first steps toward that end is self-compassion, like Kelly was saying. Compassion for self is like the milestone. I think the first stepping stone toward healing is just to acknowledge what you feel and not be overwhelmed by it. So I like the comparison to putting your hand on a hot stove. If it hurts, pull it off. So as you're doing your self-care, and Fanny, I wanted to mention something about the breathing. For a lot of trauma people, just closing your eyes is not they're not able to tolerate that. So giving yourself the option to not fit within the box of mindfulness practices, but to give yourself the allowance to do things a little differently, whatever you individually can tolerate, such as just letting your eyes fall in a downcast manner. And the number one way, the fastest way to interrupt stress is, believe it or not, to yawn. So get really good at, I tell all of my clients, get really good at yawning. Finding that corner or that bathroom or a closet where you can just go and practice a moment of mindfulness, because it's also, I think, important to note that just 1 minute each hour is as effective as 40 minutes a day. And it's much more easy to fit into your everyday life. And it's important.
Yeah. And there's no right or wrong way to meditate.
Right. I tell you, after Kelly shared with me about the yawning, I try my best to do it as much as possible. And when people yawn on me, I'm not even offended. I'm like, yes, that's right. Yawn. Your brain is taking in what I'm saying right now, So yes, who would have thought yawning was so powerful?
We need to create a yawning culture. So because people still think that is rude, but so we need to educate people.
Yes, for sure. And definitely, ladies, I'm going to have you back, and we're just going to do a whole talk show on yawning so that we can really get that information out. Again, I want to say thank you to my guests, all of you. Awesome. Kelly, Fanny, Mary, stay on even when we end the broadcast. Don't disconnect. And to all of my listeners, all of my watchers, thank you so much for supporting me on this journey with the Sonja Shockley Show. I feel like it's my life purpose. I've been called to really set the captives free. So many people are just in prison when it comes to their minds and their emotions. And so to be able to serve you in this capacity, to be able to help you turn your pain into purpose, your wounds into wisdom, and your bitter into better. I am so grateful for this opportunity. I love you with an everlasting love. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next time on the Sonja Shockley Show.